The sun cast long, sharp shadows between the glass and steel canyons of Wall Street. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and the city hummed with the relentless energy of ambition. Luxury sedans purred at the curb, their polished surfaces reflecting the distorted images of executives in tailored suits striding purposefully along the sidewalks. The air smelled of exhaust fumes, expensive cologne, and the faint scent of street food from a distant cart. Amidst this symphony of wealth and power, perched on the cold marble steps of a towering bank, sat two small figures, Lily and Mia, identical in their simple dresses and uneven braids, watched the river of people flow past. Their gazes were not envious, but filled with a quiet curiosity, as if they were observing a different species in a world that wasn't quite their own, a world of hurried phone calls and unsmiling faces. Liam Sullivan emerged from the revolving glass doors, his mind already 3 steps ahead, dissecting the morning's merger negotiations. He was the very embodiment of this world. His dark grey suit was custom-made, his shoes gleamed with a professional shine, and the platinum watch on his wrist was worth more than the car he barely drove. His hair was perfectly styled, a stark contrast to the profound weariness that settled deep in his eyes. At 29, he had built upon his inheritance to create an empire, yet the success felt hollow, like a beautiful, empty room. He moved through the crowd with an unconscious air of detachment, a ghost in his own life, deaf to the city's pulse and blind to the small, hopeful eyes watching him from the steps. He was a man drowning in everything money could buy and starved for anything it couldn't, lost in the labyrinth of his thoughts. His grip loosened for a fraction of a second. His smartphone, a sleek black monolith of technology, slipped from his hand and clattered onto the concrete with a sound that seemed to momentarily silence the city's hum. Before the thought to bend down had even fully formed in his mind, 2 small figures darted forward. Lily and Mia, moving as one, knelt and carefully picked up the device. They approached him hesitantly, their worn sneakers silent on the pavement. Lily held the phone out in her small hands, not as if returning a lost object, but as if presenting a fragile gift. Liam looked down, his gaze shifting from the unblemished screen to the 2 pairs of large, brown eyes staring up at him, shining with an unguarded innocence that felt utterly foreign in this place of calculated transactions. He took the phone, a mumbled thanks on his lips, but before he could retreat into his solitude, Lily took a small, brave step forward. She looked up at his face, her expression a mix of awe and determination. "Mister," she began, her voice small but clear, "you look like a dad from the movies." Liam froze, the words slicing through his practiced indifference. She continued, her sister Mia clutching her arm for support. "Could you be our dad? Just for one day. Our school's special event is tomorrow." The request hung in the air, so pure and direct that it struck him with the force of a physical blow. It wasn't a plea for money, it was a child's honest wish. In their hopeful faces, he saw a reflection of a loneliness he had buried long ago. It's moments like these that remind us how a simple question can change a life. If you believe in the power of these stories, your subscription allows us to keep sharing them. The world Liam Sullivan had constructed for himself was one of predictable variables and calculated risks. But the simple request from a child on a sidewalk was a force of nature he hadn't accounted for. He spent the rest of the afternoon in a daze. The girl's hopeful eyes burned into his memory. He agreed on an impulse he couldn't name, a strange, forgotten flicker of warmth in the cold expanse of his chest. It was the same feeling he vaguely remembered from a time before the accident, a time when his parents' laughter filled their home, before silence became his closest companion. He knew it was a foolish, reckless thing to do. This was not his world. These were not his children. Yet, the thought of their faces falling in disappointment tomorrow felt more unbearable than closing a multi-million-dollar deal at a loss. The next morning, the sun streamed into his minimalist penthouse, illuminating dust motes dancing in the sterile air. The apartment was a monument to his isolation, all glass, steel, and shades of grey, devoid of personal photos or sentimental clutter. He stood before his wardrobe of identical, expensive suits, the fabric feeling more like armor than clothing. For a moment, he considered calling it off, retreating back into the safety of his routine. But then his gaze fell upon a small, silver-framed photo on his nightstand, the only one he owned, a picture of him as a boy, sandwiched between his smiling parents at a school fair. He remembered the feeling of their hands on his shoulders, a fortress of love. The memory, usually a source of sharp pain, now felt like a quiet instruction. He buttoned his jacket, the decision solidifying not in his mind, but in his gut. Arriving at the public school was like stepping onto a different planet. The building was old, the brickwork faded, but it pulsed with a vibrant energy that was entirely foreign to him. The air smelled of chalk dust, floor cleaner, and the sweet scent of snacks being prepared for the event. He felt the eyes of other parents on him, their gazes a mixture of curiosity and subtle judgment. His tailored suit and polished shoes screamed of a world far removed from their own, and he felt a profound sense of being an imposter. Children ran past him in a blur of bright colors and high-pitched laughter, their carefree joy a stark contrast to the heavy weight of responsibility that had defined his own life since he was a teenager. He stood awkwardly near the entrance, a solitary island in a sea of communal warmth. Then he saw them. Lily and Mia were standing near the doors to the auditorium, their faces pressed against the small glass windows, scanning the crowd. When their eyes locked onto his, their expressions transformed into pure, unadulterated delight. They ran towards him, their worn sneakers squeaking on the linoleum floor, and without a word, each grabbed one of his hands. The simple, trusting touch was disarming. They pulled him forward, their small hands a surprisingly strong anchor, leading him through the throng of people and into the noisy, brightly decorated auditorium. For the first time, Liam didn't feel like he was leading or directing. He was being led, and the surrender to their innocent momentum was both terrifying and strangely liberating. He was a visitor in their world, and they were his guides. The event was a charmingly chaotic affair of off-key songs and clumsily recited poems. When it was their turn, Lily and Mia walked onto the small stage, holding hands tightly. Lily, ever the brave one, stepped up to the microphone. "This is our special person," she announced, her small voice amplified through the crackling speakers. "This is our dad, Liam." The words hung in the air, echoing in the cavernous space of Liam's chest. He felt 100 pairs of eyes turned to him, but he could only see the two girls on stage, looking at him with such profound pride it stole his breath away. They sang a simple song about sunshine and rainbows, their voices slightly wobbly, their eyes never leaving his face. He found himself smiling, a real, unforced smile that reached his tired eyes. After the event, on another impulse, he took them to a small diner down the street. The place was the antithesis of his life. It had red vinyl booths with small tiers patched with silver tape, a jukebox playing old songs, and the comforting smell of coffee and frying bacon. He watched, fascinated, as the girls meticulously built towers with their French fries and told him stories about their teacher, their neighbors, and a stray cat they had named Patches. He listened, truly listened, without thinking about stock prices or board meetings. They asked him questions, simple and direct, about his favorite color and if he liked dogs. He answered honestly, feeling layers of his carefully constructed persona peel away with every shared laugh and spilled drop of ketchup. He found he didn't want the day to end. The thought of returning to his silent, empty apartment was suddenly unbearable. When they finished their milkshakes, he made a decision that defied all logic. "I'll take you home," he said. the words feeling both foreign and absolutely right. It wasn't pity that drove him. It was a selfish, desperate need to hold on to this feeling, this fragile sense of connection that had bloomed so unexpectedly in the space of a few hours. He was stepping further into a life that wasn't his, a territory fraught with emotional landmines. But the potential reward felt greater than any risk. There are moments that redefine a person's journey, and if these stories of profound change resonate with you, subscribing helps us bring more of them to light. The drive across town was a journey through different worlds. The gleaming glass towers of the financial district gave way to quieter, tree-lined streets, which then transitioned into rows of older, more modest apartment buildings. The city's pulse slowed, becoming a gentler, more human rhythm. In the rearview mirror, he could see the girls had fallen asleep, their heads leaning against each other, their faces serene in the afternoon light. A powerful, unfamiliar emotion washed over him, a fierce, protective instinct. He was terrified by the intensity of what he was feeling. He was a man who had spent a decade building walls to keep people out, and in a single day, 2 small children had walked right through them, as if they weren't even there. He pulled up in front of a well-kept but aging brick building. The lobby was small and smelled faintly of bleach. The girls, now awake, led him up 3 flights of stairs, their chatter echoing in the quiet stairwell. With every step, his anxiety grew. What was he going to say to their mother? How could he possibly explain his presence in their lives? He was a stranger, a billionaire who had played dad for a day. It sounded insane, even to him. Lily pushed the apartment key into the lock with practiced ease and swung the door open. "Mom, we're home," she called out, "and we brought our special person with us." Liam took a deep breath and stepped across the threshold, bracing himself for the inevitable questions and suspicion. The woman who emerged from the small kitchen stopped dead in her tracks, a dish towel falling from her hand. The air in the room instantly crackled with a tension so thick it felt hard to breathe. Liam's heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. It was her. It was Clara Hayes. Her face was a little older, etched with lines of worry and fatigue that hadn't been there a decade ago. But her eyes, those warm, intelligent eyes that had once held all of his future, were the same. They widened in a mixture of disbelief, shock, and a deep, simmering fear. The past he had so violently buried had just materialized in the doorway of his present, holding the hands of 2 little girls. Clara's world tilted on its axis. The man standing in her living room was a ghost. He wore the armor of a world she couldn't imagine, a suit that cost more than her rent for 6 months, a watch that could pay off her debts. But beneath the polished, wealthy exterior, it was still Liam Sullivan. The boy who had captured her heart in high school and then shattered it without a word of explanation. Her first instinct was pure, primal protection. She moved to stand in front of her daughters, a shield between them and this spectre from her past. Her voice, when she finally found it, was tight and brittle. "Liam, what are you doing here? What do you want with my children?" He had no answer. The CEO, who could command a boardroom with a single glance, was rendered speechless, a teenager again in the face of the woman he had abandoned. He looked from Clara's guarded, wounded face to the innocent, confused expressions on Lily and Mia, and the pieces of a puzzle he never knew existed began to violently slam into place. The girls' eyes, their smiles, the way Lily tilted her head when she was thinking, it was all a faint echo of the girl he once loved. The air in the small apartment was a vacuum, devoid of oxygen, filled only with a decade of unspoken words, profound regret, and the terrifying, earth-shattering weight of a truth that was about to change everything. A few days later, a fragile truce hung between them, maintained through tense phone calls and brief, awkward encounters when he dropped off small gifts for the girls. Finally, Clara called him, her voice strained but resolute. asking him to meet her at a small park near her apartment. She chose a bench under a sprawling oak tree, its leaves rustling in the gentle afternoon breeze, creating a starkly peaceful backdrop for the storm brewing within her. Liam arrived, his usual suit feeling like a costume, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. He sat beside her, leaving a careful distance between them, a physical representation of the decade of silence and misunderstanding that separated them. He braced himself for an ultimatum, a demand for money or a final, definitive order to stay away from the only source of light he'd found in years. Clara took a deep, shuddering breath, her gaze fixed on a group of children playing on the swings in the distance. She began to speak, her voice barely a whisper, recounting the days and weeks after his parents' accident. She described his retreat into a shell of grief so absolute she couldn't reach him, and the agonizing decision she made to let him go, believing he needed to heal alone. Then, her voice cracked as she reached the heart of her confession. She told him about the discovery a few weeks after he vanished from her life, the 2 pink lines on a test that changed her world forever. She explained her reasons for not finding him, her fear of adding to his burden, her youthful pride, and her determination to manage on her own. Finally, she turned to face him, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "Liam," she said, the words hanging in the air like a final judgment, "Lily and Mia are your daughters." The world did not tilt for Liam Sullivan. It shattered. The rustling leaves, the children's laughter, the feeling of the hard wooden bench beneath him. It all dissolved into a roaring silence in his ears. His daughters. The words echoed in the hollow chambers of his heart, filling the vast, empty spaces he had tried to pack with wealth and work. Suddenly, everything made a terrifying, perfect sense. The immediate, inexplicable bond he felt on the sidewalk, the familiar way Mia tilted her head when she was concentrating, the brave spark in Lily's eyes that was a mirror of her mother's. It wasn't a random connection or a fleeting escape from his loneliness. It was blood calling to blood, a primal recognition his soul had understood long before his mind could. He looked at Clara, truly seeing her for the first time in 10 years, and saw not just the girl he left behind, but the woman who had protected the most precious part of his life. A sob tore through him, a raw, guttural sound of a decade's worth of repressed pain being violently exhumed. The carefully constructed walls he had built around his heart crumbled into dust, and he began to weep. He cried for his parents, for the boy who lost them, for the man who had walked through life as a ghost, but mostly he cried for the 8 years he had lost. 8 years of scraped knees, bedtime stories, first days of school, and sloppy, wonderful hugs. He slid from the bench to his knees in front of her, his carefully polished world collapsing onto the grass. "Clara," he choked out, his voice broken, "forgive me, not just for leaving you, but for not being there. For every single day I missed. It's in moments of raw honesty like this that we see the true power of a story. If you feel that power too, subscribing helps us share more journeys of healing and second chances." Clara watched him, her own tears now flowing freely, not of anger but of a shared, profound sorrow. The bitterness she had harbored for years washed away in the tide of his genuine anguish. This was not the cold, detached billionaire from the news. This was the boy she had loved, broken and lost, finally finding his way back. She slid off the bench to kneel with him, her hand coming to rest on his trembling shoulder. There were no easy words of absolution, no magic phrase to erase the years of pain and absence, but in her touch there was a silent offering of grace. The gap between them, once a chasm of regret and misunderstanding, was now just the space between two people who had a long, difficult road ahead, but who, for the first time, were facing it together. The journey to becoming a family was just beginning. Liam understood that the chasm of 8 years could not be filled with money. It had to be filled with time, with presence. He sold the sterile penthouse, that monument to his isolation, and bought a warm, spacious house in a quiet neighborhood just 10 minutes from Clara and the girls. His days were no longer measured by stock market fluctuations, but by the rhythm of family life. He learned how to make pancakes that weren't burned on one side, how to untangle the impossible knots in Mia's hair, and how to patiently explain long division to Lily. He was there for every school pickup, every scraped knee, and every bedtime story. He wasn't trying to buy back the lost years, he was earning the present, one small, ordinary, and profoundly beautiful moment at a time. Clara watched, her guarded heart slowly, cautiously, opening to this new version of the man she once knew. The relationship with Clara was a more delicate reconstruction. After the girls were asleep, the house would fall silent, and they would talk. They sat in the comfortable quiet of the living room, unearthing the past not with anger, but with a shared sense of sorrow for the two kids they had been. He spoke of the suffocating grief that had consumed him, and she spoke of the fear and fierce pride that had guided her as a young single mother. They weren't trying to excuse their past actions, but to understand them. Through these conversations, they began to see each other clearly, stripped of the ghosts of who they were. They were building a new foundation, not on the shifting sands of teenage romance, but on the solid ground of shared parenthood, mutual respect, and a tentative, mature love that felt far more real than anything they had known before. Liam's entire perspective on his fortune shifted. The numbers in his accounts, once a measure of success, now felt like a tool for a different kind of legacy. He channeled his formidable business acumen into creating the Second Story Foundation, a non-profit dedicated to providing financial, educational, and emotional support to single mothers and their children. It wasn't an act of detached philanthropy, it was deeply personal. He met with the families his foundation helped, listening to their stories and seeing echoes of Clara's struggle and his daughter's resilience in their faces. He was no longer building an empire of assets, but a legacy of opportunity. His work, once a refuge from his emptiness, had become an extension of his newfound purpose, a way to honor the family that had saved him by helping others build their own. One crisp autumn afternoon, a year later, they stood on the same marble steps where it all began. This time, however, Liam was not a ghost in a suit, but a father, in a simple sweater, holding his daughter's hands. Mia leaned her head against his shoulder, while Lily pointed out different types of cars, her voice bright with laughter. He caught Clara's eye over their heads, and she gave him a smile that held a decade of history and a lifetime of future. The hollow ache in his chest was gone, replaced by a warmth so profound it felt like coming home after a long and difficult journey. He had been a man who had everything money could buy and nothing it couldn't, but now he was truly wealthy. This transformation shows that the most powerful connections can heal the deepest wounds. And if you believe in these journeys, your subscription helps us continue to share them.